And good evening and welcome to all of our viewers on KIMA Action News' YouTube channel and to the fourth of our 9 2024 election candidate debates. Now, I'm John Kennedy O'Connor and I will be the moderator for all of our debates that we have scheduled. And tonight, the candidates for Legislative District 15, Position 1, have been invited to answer your questions on the topics that matter to you ahead of you casting your ballots this election. Now, we will welcome your live comments while we're on the air. To comment, you just need to click the subscribe button and you will see yours and other comments on the right of your screen as they appear. However, we will not be putting any of your comments to the candidates during the debate. Now, we are pleased to welcome to the studio, on my right, Republican candidate Chris Corey, who has been the representative for District 14 since 2019, and on my left is Chase Foster, who is running as an independent and who is currently Vice Chair of the Kennewick Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. Is there a problem with my sound? Okay, I'm sorry, okay. Sorry, the problem with my sound there, I apologise for that. Now, Mr. Foster is the Vice President of the Kennewick Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. Now, we've allowed up to 1 hour for each debate with 2 candidates. The rules of this debate will be the same as any other. I will ask a question that the candidates have not been shown, and the candidates will each have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted, followed by 1 further minute each for rebuttals. Now, we drew lots before coming on air to see which candidate would answer the question first, and Representative Corey was drawn. So after that, questions will be put alternately. Now, both candidates have already recorded a personal statement, which you will find on our YouTube channel. Mr. Corey, Mr. Foster, I really want to thank you both very much indeed for being here tonight, and I'd like to start with the first question. And the first question comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima. What are your top 3 priorities? And if elected, how will you ensure you've made progress or indeed resolved those issues before the next election? And Mr. Corey, you have 2 minutes to answer first.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to KIMA for having us this evening. It's been an honor to serve the people of Central Washington since 2019 as one of your state representatives, and I look forward to hopefully earning your vote for this year's 2024 election. My priorities have always been to protect the families and businesses of Central Washington, whether that's in finances and making sure we have a fiscally responsible budget that properly manages taxpayer money and makes sure that we don't overtax citizens, to ensuring that our priorities of government are well funded, whether it's ensuring our schools have enough resources, local governments don't have unfunded mandates on them, or just really making sure that state government stays within its scope and doesn't exceed its authority. My job has always been to look out for the people of Central Washington. I'm like a lot of us in this community. I've got a family. I'm trying to manage work, kids, making sure that they're going to all their various events, make sure we can put food on the table, and constantly thinking about how we can do better to make sure the people in our valley can live the most free lives that they can with as little government interference as possible. So with that, my 3 priorities are always very simple: fiscal responsibility, low taxes, less regulation, and ensuring that we protect our individual rights and our constitutional rights, both on the state and federal level.
Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Foster, you also have 2 minutes to answer.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited that I get to meet with you so formally and in a friendly manner. I'll jump right in. My first and most important priority is housing, mostly because it affects literally every Washingtonian here. We've been watching prices skyrocket, both in housing, in rent, which has exacerbated the homeless problem on both sides of the mountains. And this is something that there are numerous different solutions to that aren't being proposed right now by either major party. And the fighting on it needs to be stopped. And in order to do that, I think we need new voices to enter the debate and bring those ideas to the table. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say education. It is easily the largest thing that Washington spends money on. To say that it's not a priority is essentially to skip the #1 job that we as legislators would actually have to work on. And of course, that education has seen tremendous changes since COVID, and the money coming in, money out. The Yakima school districts have seen major problems with reduced populations lately. And so these are issues that have to be addressed urgently before we see long-term ramifications. And the last, I would like to bring specifically to our community, which is healthcare. We're seeing new issues arise with the loss of services and rural healthcare struggling to survive amid new regulations and changing payment structures. And those are things that we have to get on very quickly, again, or we're going to see long-term damage to our communities.
And Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute to follow up.
My opponent, Mr. Foster, brought up some really good points. Housing, absolutely. We've done some good things in the last few years to hopefully open up more development and building to get more housing out there, both market rate and affordable. There's more we can do. We have to roll back a lot of our regulations. We need to take a look at the Growth Management Act. That's been one of the things that's really hindered our development here in rural counties. We need to look at additional ways to incentivize multifamily developments, whether it's multifamily tax credit, making sure that that is something that's done statewide that I sponsored for. When it comes to education, absolutely correct. We need to work on catching kids back up from COVID. My colleagues and I worked on a bill to provide additional tutors for learning loss to ensure that students who needed to make up time could. And on healthcare, absolutely correct. Also sponsored a bill to increase our Medicaid rates to ensure our providers can actually have enough money to cover for the services they're providing.
And Mr. Foster, you have a further 1 minute.
I appreciate that you've been working on these issues in the past, and I thank you for that. Unfortunately, I think that it's difficult to talk about doing this work that's very necessary while we're also talking about potential tax cuts, because the simple reality is we need to pay for the services that we want to provide as a state. And education being over 2/3 of our budget every year is something, if we're going to say it's a priority, means that we can't make significant tax cuts and keep that a priority, especially after the McCleary decision made clear that Washington needed to do a lot more work to maintain the schools across the state. And so I think that while our priorities are a little bit different, we have a lot of similarities there, and I'm grateful for that, because no matter who wins, I believe that the right work is going to get done. But I think we disagree a little bit there on the priorities and how we would achieve those goals.
Well, thank you both very much indeed. And our second question tonight comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima. District 15 has seen many changes in boundaries and the electorate since the last election. How has this changed your election strategy and your policy platform? And Mr. Foster, you can answer first, and you have 2 minutes.
So the recent redistricting, in my opinion, was an embarrassing sidestep of what should have been one of the most progressive and bipartisan redistricting processes in the country. Washington has a bipartisan commission who is supposed to, with equal input from the two major parties, create fair boundaries. It's a simple process, simple rule, and left-leaning organizations managed to find a way to sidestep that, find a judge that would be friendly to that, and draw new boundaries to squeeze a purple district out of what is very commonly known to be a very red area. It is, as far as I can tell, the best definition of gerrymandering that Washington has seen in a generation. And that is extremely worrisome, and legislation needs to be passed very quickly in order to ensure that sidestepping our procedures, especially when it comes to our elections, cannot happen again. And I think actually we should go further than that, because there are other issues in our elections that are coming up. Recently, the Commissioner for Public Lands election currently this year, we saw 2 Republicans almost take the final 2 slots for the general election, while Democrat candidates received over 50% of the vote, well over 50%. And essentially 2 Republicans nearly gamed our elections in order to be the final 2 on the ballot. And there are solutions to this. One of my favorites is ranked choice voting, where if we push that, it's a method of voters more clearly indicating their preferences for their representatives. And getting ranked choice voting would eliminate problems with gaming our system that we just saw, by about 46 votes in the new election.
And Mr. Corey, you now have 2 minutes for your answer.
Well, I agree a lot with what Mr. Foster just said. This was clearly a gerrymander, not for any particular reason other than to try to gain more power in Olympia. Washington State has a model redistricting commission. It should be adopted, I think, everywhere in this country. It takes out a lot of the blanket partisanship that goes on in other states. And what it does for folks at home who may not know is it essentially puts 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and a 5th non-voting member at the table to come up with maps that are fair for the whole state. And through that process, there's give and take, like there should be on any important piece of legislation or work, and they come up with maps that are fair for the entire state that reflect the growth and demographic changes in the state, and so on and so forth. This was an intentional workaround that is unfortunate. The case is still ongoing, and I think will probably be overturned in the long run. But for now, we've got these districts, and we're running in them. I'll tell you, it really hasn't changed my strategy much. I've always been very transparent on who I am, and even though I'm a Republican, I work with anyone in Olympia. I don't compromise my values, but I find common ground where I can. Most of my constituents know they can come to my office with ideas, questions, concerns, and I don't ask if they voted for me or what party they're from. I ask, how can I help? And so from that perspective, this really hasn't changed my strategy. I go out and I meet with people, talk to them, let them know who I am. And even if we don't agree on everything, I guarantee you I can find stuff with you that we agree on and hopefully can work together on in Olympia.
And Mr. Foster, you have 1 minute to follow up.
And I'm glad that we agree on that. I think that Washington's model needs to be more strongly enforced. And I do hope that it actually gets overturned, because it didn't even solve the problem that it purported to be solving. To my strategy, it didn't really change that much. However, I was very disappointed to watch Sunnyside get carved off from what was going to be my district, because Sunnyside is part of the valley between Yakima and the Tri-Cities, and carving that valley in half literally split communities in half. And so it broke my heart to see that, and it changes how we see our community in some ways, which is unfortunate.
And Mr. Corey, you have a further 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that the good news is Yakima, for as long as I've been in Olympia, and probably before that, has really relied on having legislators, whether they're on the 13th, 14th, or 15th, work together as a whole. So I know for me personally, as well as my colleagues, I don't look at the boundary and say, well, I'm not going to help you because you're on the other side. You're in the 14th versus the 13th or whatever. We work together, and I think that's actually benefited Yakima. And hopefully, going into this next session, we'll continue to see that.
And I do want to make it clear for viewers, because this is actually emails that we've had. You currently represent District 14, but of course, because of the boundary changes, you are now running in for District 15. Well, thank you both. Appreciate the answers there. And just to remind you that subscribers can comment on tonight's debate. You just need to click the subscribe button, and you can type your comments on the right of your screen, where you see other comments from other viewers. And we definitely want to hear from you as to you react to the answers the candidates are giving. But let's move on now to our third question tonight, which again comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima. Washington's 15th district has 3 distinct areas: the Snoqualmie Forest, the Wine Valley, and the Yakima Training Center, each with distinct characteristics and different problems. How will you make solutions that benefit all of the areas in the district and not just one? And Mr. Corey, you have up to 2 minutes to answer.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. It's a good one. I've had the fortune since getting elected in 2019 of representing very large and diverse areas. The 14th, before the first redistricting, actually included parts of Yakima County, all of Klickitat County, all of Skamania County, and even a little bit of Clark County. So I had a over 3-hour drive district end to end. So I quickly learned that it's important to have the connections and contacts with communities across the district. So whether you're up in the Snoqualmie Forest, whether you're at the training center, even if you're down, this district goes all the way down into parts of Prosser. It's making sure you're out about and connecting with local leaders and constituents and citizens to find out what their needs are. And that happens obviously during session. We're constantly in communication, but it also means in the interim, I'm out and about with communities, taking tours, listening to folks, talking to see what's going on, so that I can be obviously not just an advocate for our district and our community, but also a champion for it. I love to brag to the west side about the things we have going on in this valley, and will continue to do so, hopefully in the future. Thank you.
And Mr. Foster, you also now have 2 minutes for your answer.
Well, I would start by saying that I believe that many of the problems in these various different areas are very similar, and that I believe that many of them can be addressed at the same time. But I'd like to add that I love seeing these broken down because I was raised in Natchez. I was raised at the base of the mountains. We went camping constantly. I spent as many weekends up in the mountains as I did out of them, and that's my home. And then I went to college in Yakima for years and spent many years going to events and meeting many new friends from West Valley, Sela, Eisenhower, covering the entire area when I was young. And now I live in the Wine Valley. And I attend events like Cinco de Mayo in Sunnyside. And it's amazing to see the varying different cultures across the area. Mm-hmm. And the best thing I can say is that as a nonpartisan representative, I would be the most willing to represent every voice in the Valley. I would not be beholden to any party lines, and it doesn't matter where you are from or what the problem is. I want to do my best to try and solve that. And that's whether you are up in the trees, out in the desert, or down in the orchards with me right now. I'd love to hear from you.
And Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute to follow up.
Well said. I will represent you as well if you're up in the trees.
Anything else you want to say, Mr. Foster?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that was a very short answer. That's good. Let's keep it pithy. There you are. Well, thank you both very much. And let's move on now to our fourth question tonight. This question also comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima. In the statement that all Yakima voters received in their voter guide prior to the primary election, both candidates stressed their commitment to community service. How will this be reflected in your actions if you are elected? And Mr. Foster, you can answer first, and you have up to 2 minutes.
Well, as stated, I spent a significant amount of my life dedicated to community service. I was part of various different programs even before I left high school, including a many $million grant of the Yakima Valley Systems of Care working on mental health and creating wraparound services in the Valley. I left, I continued, I helped build a 50-person, minimum 50-hour-a-year volunteer organization in college. And then after leaving, I spent 2 full years AmeriCorps, which is sort of like, it's essentially a stipended volunteer. They give you less than minimum wage in order to make sure you're fed while you're volunteering as a full-time job. And I did 2 full years of that, one in Spokane and one in Hermiston, Oregon. And I love it. I love volunteering. I love spending time in the community. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I want to give back to my communities. I feel that I've gotten so much joy from so much in my life that I want to spread it around and help people solve problems that they can't on their own. And I believe that that translates directly to representation and serving communities.
Okay. And Mr. Corey, you also have 2 minutes to follow up.
Well, yeah, thank you. I've been involved in our community ever since my wife and I moved back to the Valley over 10 years ago, whether it was being involved in my local Rotary, Southwest Rotary, the most awesomest club in the world, Salvation Army, Crime Stoppers, Life Choices. It's been an honor for me to be able to help and give back to this community that's given so much to my family. And that reflects to the work I do in Olympia. I am reaching out to find out how I can help those that help others in our community. I've been proud to work with Triumph Treatment Center to expand access to beds for them, for treatment in our valley. People for People, they've been an excellent organization serving people up and down Central Washington, helping them with their 211 to make sure that they could continue to operate with their program and needs. Chuck Austin Place was actually something that I got to work on with Representative Defoe our freshman year when we barely even knew where the bathrooms were in Olympia. We got the opportunity to help advocate for funding that could build a place to help service veterans in our valley. That's what it's all about for me. I mean, there's the community service that I get to do as an individual, and then there's the community service I get to do as a representative for the people in the Yakima Valley and throughout Central Washington. And that commitment won't ever waver, and it'll continue on if reelected.
Well, thank you. Mr. Foster, you have 1 minute to follow up.
I think the good news here for the voters is that I honestly believe that the statement is accurate. We're both very dedicated to community service, and I think that will come through no matter who you vote for this year. The only thing that I think you had wrong there is that my wife is currently the Rotary president of the Sunnyside Club. and they are currently working on the Lighted Implement Parade, which I hope everybody goes to. It's an amazing parade, and they are definitely the best Rotary Club.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Corey, do you want to challenge that one?
I would be a terrible Rotarian if I tried to challenge that one, because that would violate the four-way test. So,
well, we cover the Sunnyside Lighted Parade, and Mike McCabe is our host again this year, so that will be coming up later on in the year.
shameless plug.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. I do want to remind everyone watching that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that will give you access to the live chat to the right of your screen, and we'll hope you'll join in the discussion. Are the candidates giving you the answers you want to hear? Well, let us know. But in the meantime, let's move on to our fifth question tonight, and this question comes from an Action News viewer in our own neighbourhood of Terrace Heights. In the race for this District 15 seat, there are only 2 white male candidates on the ballot. How can you reassure voters that whoever is elected, you can effectively represent the entire community that has a very wide and ethnically diverse population? And Mr. Corey, you have up to 2 minutes to answer.
Well, thank you. I would say that I represent everybody in Olympia. Now, obviously, on any given vote, my vote may not represent everyone, and that's just kind of the nature of how up and down votes work on bills. But I try to hear as many people as possible. I have a very open door policy. I meet with pretty much anyone and everyone who wants to see me on an issue. Now, again, I said it earlier, we may not always agree. I may not agree with your view, and you may not agree with mine, and that's okay. But it's important we have that dialogue, that respect, and that discussion. I have changed my mind on votes because of conversations with people in our community, whether it is during session, in person, or visiting people after. I cannot think of a single person that is not able to access their state representative to talk about their issues, whether we agree or disagree. And I don't look at your race, your ethnicity, or your political party preference, where you come from, which group you're part of, before we have that conversation. I have people that I may disagree with on almost everything in my office every year, and we try to find common ground where we can. So when it comes to representing the entire community, I do that by ensuring that I am listening to as many voices as possible, and then making the best decision that I think represents a majority of the people in the Yakima Valley, or represents our best needs here in Central Washington. And again, we may not always disagree. I get those emails. I get those phone calls from people who, when they're upset about something I've either voted on and may not be supporting, and I try to call those people back and email those people back just to have that conversation, to see where they're coming from, and hopefully they can see where I'm coming from. Again, we may not always agree, and it may not always be, the vote that you would have liked me to take, but I do take pride in trying to listen to everyone before making those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. And Mr. Foster, you also now have 2 minutes to answer.
I'm gonna be honest, this is a really hard question. And you're absolutely right. 2 white males up here probably is not the most ideal method of having the most diverse options on the ballot. And so I'm going to take this moment to encourage anybody out there who does not meet that white male status, please run for office. Because the thing that I truly believe is that we need more voices and more ideas at this table debating right now. So putting that out of the way, unfortunately, the best answer I can say is that this has been my home for a long time, and living in a multicultural community is not new to me. Having people with different backgrounds is just part of life. And each and every one of those backgrounds is valuable and beautiful, and I want to acknowledge those differences in Olympia. It's really that simple. You have to listen. I legitimately wish my Spanish was better, but I'll do the best I can, and I will take, it doesn't matter where you are from or what your beliefs, I would take that to heart, and I would take it to the Capitol.
Okay, and Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute to follow up if you choose.
I think I've stated it pretty well.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Foster?
I don't think so. No, thank you.
Well, we appreciate that. And I want to thank you both indeed very much for your questions. Thank you. And moving on now to our 6th question, which comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima County. Now, if elected, one of you will likely be in a minority party in the legislature, and one of you would have no party affiliation at all. How will you work with other representatives with differing political ideology for the common good of your district? And Mr. Foster, you can answer first, and you have up to 2 minutes.
Thank you for this question. This is a fun one because I am running as neither a Republican or a Democrat, which would actually cause some various problems with the rules in which Washington runs its legislature. There are actually laws and rules tied to partyhood that would become vague and confusing if someone actually gets elected without a party. And so Washington would be forced to create new rules and processes to accommodate people that are elected outside the major parties, which would be very beneficial for anybody following me to run for office. Again, increasing the number of voices and ideas that make it to the table. However, it also has the extra benefit that being apart from either party means that you can work with both of them and not be stigmatized for it. Because the reality is, both parties would be able to work with you and say it's bipartisan, or I don't know what to call that actually when one doesn't have a party, but it's not single party. Semi-half partisan. Anyways, but the value of being able to come from outside the parties means that your background, your funding, all your supporters, they are your supporters, and you can speak directly to them. And that means that the Valley would have a representative that isn't tied to a state party, but is tied to them most closely. And I think that's really exciting. And I really hope, worst case scenario, and I get blown out of the water here, that it inspires a few more people to run, even if they don't agree wholeheartedly with one of the two major platforms currently on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. And Mr. Corey, you also now have 2 minutes for your answer.
Well, thank you very much. Another great question. You know, I've been proud of my work in Olympia that is not just based on working with Republicans. I've worked with Democrats as well. You have to when you're in the minority party. And if you're in no party, you're going to have to as well. They control the agenda. They have the gavels. They can pick and choose what comes up for a vote. So you have to make sure that you're there advocating for your values and trying to find ways to move your legislation, get your stuff passed. And sometimes it's about making changes, even if it's on a bill that you know you're not going to vote for. I've been able to work on having those relationships with Democrats so that I can make those suggestions and changes to improve a bill, to make it a little better, or sometimes I jokingly say a little less worse, so that we can get stuff done. You know, I sit as the ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee, and we've been able to change in the years that I've been in leadership how we do things on the budget. And I'm hoping to lead that in the future. Before, it used to be the Democrats would be in one room, they would get their budget briefing, the Republicans would be in another room, they'd get their budget briefing, and then we'd be able to ask for things, kind of get thrown into this black box, and then right before we vote on it, it spits out, here's what we're doing, here's what we're not doing. I asked them to do something a little differently. I said, let's actually go through the budget together. For the first time, Republicans and Democrats in the same room when we're meeting with our staff. Let's learn about it together. Let's find out what our common priorities are. What are we going to do this year? What does the state want to fund? Whether it's, you know, mental health, homelessness, housing, and then give me that information so that I can work with my Republican colleagues in appropriations to come up with what I believe our good ideas are. And then let's talk those through. And what that meant was a much better process. It meant we were working together. It was less contentious. We were able to understand where they were coming from, and they were able to understand where we were coming from. And I really take that to heart, and I do that in every area of my work as a legislator. I don't just talk to the Republicans. I go reach out to the Democrats as well, because that's what you're going to do to get stuff done in Olympia.
And Mr. Foster, you have 1 minute to follow up if you choose.
And I appreciate that you're working to be bipartisan, but I don't think many people are seeing it. The reality is that both parties have been at each other's throats for years now, and we see a lot more bickering and fighting than we see bipartisanship. And so I'm glad that you believe that you're seeing successes in that, but I don't think we're seeing that here in the Valley. Republicans keep making promises and that they're going to fight for various different causes that they believe very strongly about, but at the end of the day, a lot of it ends up as empty air. And they say that they want Second Amendment rights or better police funding, but that doesn't come out. And so I think Republicans need to do a much better job of giving more realistic expectations of what their bipartisan efforts can actually achieve. And I think that being aside from the two parties creates an opportunity there that doesn't exist within the two major parties currently.
Mr. Corey, you have a further 1 minute.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the view on kind of the back and forth between the two parties is largely driven by the national media and what we see in DC. Probably close to 75 to 80% of the bills that we pass are bipartisan. They're unanimous. They come off the House floor. Are there very contentious issues where we fight and debate long into the night? Absolutely. Do those sometimes steal the spotlight? Yes, because they're more sensational, right? It's what's more fun to cover. A 2 a.m. fight over gun rights, or the bill where we actually passed peer support services so that those who've experienced mental health struggles and addiction can actually help people coming out of that themselves. It tends to be to the word more sensational. And we probably do need to do a better job of highlighting the bipartisan. And I do try to do that in my newsletters. I try to look at anything that I'm putting out. I try to show not, just one-sidedness. I want to talk about the whole story so that our constituents can understand what's going on for them in Olympia.
Well, thank you both very much. Appreciate that. And I think the word is non-partisan for somebody in your position. Isn't that right? Wouldn't it be?
I would think so.
I would guess.
Yes, but what's the term when you have a non-partisan and a partisan working together?
Don't ask me. I've no idea. Well, thank you both very much. And let's move on now to question number 7. And this question comes from an Action News viewer here in Yakima. If you are elected, you will spend most of your time in Olympia. How will you remain connected to the issues and challenges that your district faces? And Mr. Corey, you have up to 2 minutes to answer.
So the good news is we're a part-time citizen legislature, which means that we are not in Olympia all year long, thankfully. I think most Washingtonians can be grateful that we have very set schedules, 105 days in even number years, 60 days in odd years for us to do the work of the people. And then we go home and we go back to our daily lives. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not out working. Like today, I was down visiting a hospital, getting a tour and looking at what they need potentially to grow, to maintain and upgrade facilities. So it is a full year-round job, but the legislating part in Olympia, thankfully for all of us, is very limited. It is a huge sacrifice that our families make. My wife is a saint, and I always ask her before I ever run, or before I announce and before I run for election, are you in for 2 more? Because it does mean time away from your family, from your kids. It means missing things, whether it's birthdays, if it's during the week. Oftentimes on appropriations or when you're in the thick of voting on the floor, it means weekends away. I will tell you, if we are not actively working on the weekend, I am home every weekend. I try to make sure I am home by Friday night to make sure that I can be there for my kids, for my family, make sure I'm at church on Sunday, visiting with people on the weekend. So I stay connected because I want to be in Yakima. Olympia is good to go to for a time. It's important work we do there, but the best place I can be when I'm not voting on bills or working on legislation is here at home. And that's always been a priority for me. So for me, staying connected, obviously it's a digital world. We're able to talk, text, email, video conference from Olympia, but being home, there's nothing like it. And in the last 6 years, I've memorized every turn on Highway 12, getting home on the, whenever I can.
And Mr. Foster, you also now have 2 minutes for your answer.
On this, I think we mostly agree. The biggest sacrifice happens at home. Mm-hmm. I have 4 young kids ranging from 6 to 1.5. And I admit that is the biggest concern I have with this entire election is missing them. And my wife, who would have to do all that work that we normally partner on without me. However, it doesn't change the fact that they are the primary reason I'm here. Because I see the issues that we have in Washington, we have in our valley, and I don't want those problems to exist when they're my age. I don't want them to have to worry about the same things that I worry about. I want to be able to tell them that I did everything in my power to make sure that they don't have the same challenges that I faced, or that my fellow citizens or fellow valley folk face. And the really fun answer to this question, how you remain connected, is to go out in the community. I mentioned the lighted farm implement parade. Go to the Cherry Festival in Granger. Go to Cinco de Mayo in Sunnyside. Go to Hop Fest in Yakima. Sportsman's Days. Oh, I cannot believe how many Sportsman's Days that I went to back in Natchez. And to actually go out and celebrate the various different cultures and events that our communities fully embrace and love, and be out there with them. Talk to them. Say, hey, what's going on? Hey, I actually have a say at the state level. What can I, anything you want brought up, anything you want to enter into consideration here. And that is how you stay connected. Don't just be in your community, go out in your community. Embrace it. Love it.
And Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute to follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. We have so many good things going for us, and I'm with Mr. Foster. That's why I ran. I wanted to make sure that my kids had a bright future, and that they would want to stay not just in Washington State, but I want them here in the Yakima Valley. We have so many good things going for us. Mr. Foster listed a bunch of them. I'm so proud to be able to brag about the things that we have here that oftentimes some of my colleagues in Olympia may not realize. You don't know how many people I tell we have a medical university here in Yakima, and they're like, they have no idea. We have so many good things going for us. We are, we're a leader in so many areas. The beauty of this valley is just incredible, and I couldn't agree more with Mr. Foster. Getting out and being and meeting and seeing all the amazing people and places and things we have here.
And Mr. Foster, you have a further 1 minute if you'd like.
Yeah, gosh darn it. This is just a really terrible debate topic here because it turns out we both just really love it here in the Valley. So I think I can just leave it at that. This is an amazing place, and I love being here.
It is an amazing place indeed. Well, thank you both very much. I do want to remind everyone watching that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that will give you access to the live chat to the right of your screen. We hope you'll join in the discussion. But moving on now to our 8th question, which comes from an Action News viewer here in Terrace Heights. Do you believe there's been a degradation in politicians' behavior? And how do you make sure you remain above personality politics? And Mr. Foster, you have one answer. You can answer first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, I think the obvious thing is that coming in as a nonpartisan candidate, I step in from a position where I'm not currently tied to the parties that have essentially led this degradation over the last few years. And this honestly is one of the major reasons I'm here today, is because I see the candidates that tend to be showing up now, and they're taking more extreme stances. They come out far more angry than helpful, and that worries me. It really concerns me to see candidates angry at everything without having good answers or solutions that other people are willing to work with them on. And so coming in outside of that is essentially like playing a wild card. It means that I get to make the new rule. I would be able to make the new rules on how political behavior can happen outside of those. And I think exciting to see what that could do to legislative processes and the solutions that come out of that.
And Mr. Corey, you now have your 2 minutes for your answer.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think, especially on the national level, there has been a real push towards following politicians because of their personalities and their outlandish comments rather than the actual work they're doing. And I think on the federal level, you're actually losing a lot of really good legislators because they're tired of that. Thankfully, that is not really infiltrated Olympia all that much. And I try to, maintain that myself. One of the things that has always stuck for me was when, as a young man, I read A Purpose-Driven Life. And one of the first days in that book, it says, life is not about you. And I truly believe that. I kind of hold that as one of my internal mottos. This life isn't about me. It's about serving and helping other people, whether it's directly with my wife and kids at home or the community at large. And when you wake up every day and realize that life's not about you, you just tend to avoid the personality politics. I try my best never to attack anyone's as a person. I will go after political issues, right? That's fair game. It's fair to discuss political points, but I try to leave the personalities at home, or the personal politics and the personal attacks out of it, because it doesn't matter. It's a poor argument, in my opinion. And my 13-year-old son, who's been reading a lot and studying a lot about debate and arguments, would tell me that's a poor argument to make. If you're making an argument about someone's personality or about something personal, you're obviously losing and you're not getting your point across. So I try to do that in everything. I make it about the actual issue at hand, not about the person. And when you go to Olympia, when you actually spend time with people, it's much harder to want to go after them personally, because you know who they are, what their likes and dislikes are, where they come from and who their families are. And I've found in my representing constituents, when I get emails or phone calls from angry people, talking to them usually gets them into a place where it becomes more about the issue and less about being angry. And I think that that's hugely important.
I think you both answered that question very well. So if you will indulge me for your 1 minute follow-up, you both have young children, you both have families. How do you keep them safe in this current political climate that we have, Mr. Foster? Do you worry about them?
I always worry about my children. There's nothing more than I worry about than my children. But I don't believe that here in the Valley that the political climate is violent enough to threaten their safety. Now, that might change in the future. I really hope it doesn't. And I would, as a legislator, I would certainly do anything in my power to make sure it doesn't. But at the moment, I don't think that we've reached that point. Now, I think that we're potentially moving in a very dangerous direction on that, and that civility in public office needs to make a significant return. And luckily, I do believe that the Republicans are doing so in Washington. However, I think that the weight of that is diminished slightly by being the minority party. As you said yourself, you're required to be civil with the Democrats because they have most of the power in the legislature.
And Mr. Corey, anything you'd like to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have 4 kids at home, and I worry about the political climate and debate. I've had to have lengthy conversations with my 13-year-old who's actually watching now about, compromise and coming to a good bipartisan solution, and not agreeing with somebody on everything, but finding areas you do agree on and working from there. And so that's a good life lesson, right? There's great life lessons I've been able to work on my kids with as they've gotten to meet people who are not from my political party or don't agree politically. I've had, Democrats over to my house when they come to town to visit and meet. They've gotten to meet my family. They've spent time. We've gotten to know each other personally. And I want them to see that example. We've been very blessed. It's actually been very nice. I mean, one time during the pandemic, I got a death threat. And other than that, it was pretty mild. Most of the time, it's pretty good. And my family has, I think been, treated very well by this community.
Well, thank you both very much for answering that question, and also for taking the slight curveball there as well. Now, our next question comes from an Action News viewer in Terrace Heights. How do you plan to address the healthcare crisis in the Yakima Valley? And Mr. Corey, you have 2 minutes to answer.
Yeah, this is a conversation I've been having a lot. Just had one today with a hospital administrator. We've got a lot of work to do. The state is underfunding Medicaid, and that's having a real impact on healthcare quality and access throughout the state, but particularly here in Yakima. We are a very high Medicare payer mix rate. And if you look into it, Medicaid is paying a fraction of what the actual costs are for services. Medicare is basically break even, but then all of our medical system relies on either private insurance or private pay in order to make up that difference. We're at an inflection point. If the state's going to continue to be in the insurance business with Medicaid, we have to increase our reimbursement rates. I actually co-authored a bill with one of my colleagues from the Puget Sound area to increase those rates using existing revenues through the marijuana revenues account. I figured something good should come out of taxes on marijuana usage. And that's one way. We need to get our Medicaid rates up. That's one way. We're losing too many doctors, too many clinics, too many practices because they can't keep the doors open. Another thing that I've focused on, obviously, apart from increasing those rates, is making sure we don't create regulatory burdens in Olympia that lead to further consolidation and shutdown of hospital systems. We actually were able to stop a bill this year that would have been tremendously bad for rural hospitals. It would have created a whole new level of bureaucracy, and millions upon millions of dollars were going to come out of the healthcare system just to pay for the Attorney General to manage and monitor any mergers and acquisitions in healthcare in our state. It's not the direction we need to go. Our hospitals are struggling, our clinics are struggling, and we need to find ways to increase reimbursement rates, to keep providers in our valley, to make sure that when you need care, you have access to it, and you don't have to wait forever or go to Seattle or the Tri-Cities to get healthcare.
And Mr. Foster, you also now have 2 minutes for your answer.
And as I said, this is one of my biggest priorities. I'm very personally connected to healthcare. And you're absolutely right. This is an absolute crisis. We are losing services across the board. Toppenish just closed a birthing center. The regional hospital shut down. That was national news. And now they're in the valley right now. A group of people on the ballot this year trying to start a public hospital district, just hoping to manage to bring back some of the services that are being lost, which means that our valley is intimately aware that this is a major problem. However, I would disagree slightly on the method of solving it, because while increasing Medicaid would be great, because across the valley, it's a very high Medicaid usage area, you have to raise taxes. You have to find that money somewhere, and healthcare is expensive. However, I would rather take it in the other way and decrease an expense that would actually probably be very simple to do. The business and occupation tax in Washington, which is any organization that does business, is actually higher on nonprofit hospitals than it is on for-profit businesses such as retail or manufacturing. And not even by a little bit, it's actually 3 times the rate, which means that our nonprofit health providing services are paying more in taxes than large-scale sales corporations in the state. This is a very easy topic where we could adjust those taxes to be lower on healthcare providing organizations and decrease the cost of healthcare overall, as well as make it easier for these organizations to keep these doors open. Because this is not an issue that will just go away. We have to address this, or we will continue to slowly bleed services in this valley.
Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute to follow up.
Yeah, this is probably an area, this is where it gets really contentious and we start disagreeing with each other a little bit. I don't think we need to raise taxes. We had a bill that used existing revenues to increase those rates. I actually agree with him. If that B&O tax rate is what that is, we should absolutely go lower it. Whether he's in office or I'm in office come January, that's a bill I would love to introduce and work on and advocate for. There's absolutely no reason for that. The state should address that issue. But here's the thing. It's not about not having enough revenues. It's about not having our priorities straight. We spend so much money across so many different areas. Our state's budget has gone up 130% in just over 10 years. I don't know of many people in my circle of friends who've had their budgets go up, their incomes go up that much. Our state has been very blessed with economic opportunities on both sides of the state. The revenue is not the problem. It's how we're spending it and where we're spending it. So I think we can do these things within existing revenues.
And Mr. Foster, you have a further 1 minute.
Well, you're right. This is the point at which we do disagree, because the reality is a tremendous amount of the money that we spend in Washington is to education. And the next place is medical or health services that encompasses a whole wide variety, but particularly Medicare, Medicaid are expensive portions of that. And so when we talk about prioritizing, the only significant budgetary thing that we could cut to make a significant dent in Medicare, Medicaid is education. And I believe that we both stated here that that's a priority for us. It's the biggest thing that Washington does. And I don't think anybody watching this wants us to cut education in order to pay for healthcare. And so we can't just magic this money out of thin air, and it has to come from somewhere. And the reality is that most of the taxes that have been introduced in Washington in the last few years have very specific guidelines on how they're allowed to be spent. We're not increasing the general budget where we can flex this money around from place to place. So I don't see how we could increase reimbursements without cutting other very important things in our budget.
Well, thank you both. And our final question in this election candidate debate comes from an Action News viewer in Yakima. Will you accept the result of this election, no matter what the outcome? Mr. Foster, you can answer first, and you have up to 2 minutes.
Yes. Done.
That's an easy question. Mr. Corey?
Yes.
You don't need 2 minutes.
Don't need 2 minutes.
You don't need to follow up.
Thank you.
This has been very disappointingly agreeable.
I know.
We found some, I think, some little disagreement there with the healthcare, but generally speaking,
this wouldn't be a very fun election if we agreed on everything.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Well, I do want to thank you both. You've been extremely well behaved, I would say. So probably that's the best way to say it. You've both been very generous with your time, and you both, I think, answered all of our questions for us. Now, so I just want to say that's all of our time for our fourth and latest 2024 election candidate debate. I want to thank both Representative Chris Corey and Chase Foster very sincerely for being with us tonight and for taking our viewers' questions. And I want to thank you for watching and for all of your questions and comments. We hope you have found this discussion helpful in making up your mind for the upcoming election race. Now, our next debate is tomorrow, Thursday, October 17th, and that is at 1 p.m. when the candidates for US Representative Congressional District 8 will be invited to join us here in the KIMA Action News studio. And we will once again be live on our YouTube channel, but that's much earlier. That's actually at 1 p.m. tomorrow. We hope you'll join us tomorrow afternoon, and a very good night.